to bring a specific thing or a specific amount directly to God, but rather to Him through the work in the church. We're not bringing these directly to God and saying, here's my animal, here's my money, whatever it is that our worship then in the new covenant is bringing something to God through this offering for the furtherance of the work of His kingdom. So what does that look like? You see, in the new covenant, in the early church, they'll tell you this. They needed to support people who needed assistance. There were widows who needed assistance. There were families who were destitute. And there were preachers who needed to be supported, and so on and so forth. That was the work of the church that needed to be done, and finances were mandatory for that, to make sure that it happened. They needed those things to make sure that the church grew, that the gospel was spread, that the seed was sown. Money was a part of that. Money was needed as a part of the gospel for it to continue on and to spread like it did. Giving was not this. Here's one thing I think we miss sometimes. Giving, how do I put this without sounding like I'm being, like I'm disrespecting the word? We should not view giving as a command. That's not how God instituted giving for the church. In the old law, that's how it was. You give because I told you to give. In the new covenant, you give because that's your response of love. That's your response of appreciation to God and the blessings that He's given and the furtherance for the work of the church. It's a change of perspective is what it is. See, when we start to view giving differently than just an act of worship or a command of God, giving takes on a whole new meaning for us. You see, the tagline I have up there is a sacrificial perspective. You see, the church was taking up a weekly offering not because they were supposed to take up a weekly offering, but because they knew they needed to take up a weekly offering, because people needed to be supported. The kingdom needed to be grown. Preachers needed to be sent out in other places, and so we need to take up an offering so that this work can continue. The church started out small. We need to support one another, and so we're going to grow, and we're going to grow, and we're going to grow, and the more we grow, the more it's going to take for us to support one another. And so we pull our funds together, and we support one another, and then we send it out so that the kingdom can be grown and the seed can be sown. So consider this word again. It's a response. Our giving is a response. We sang a song this morning, Jesus paid it all. All to Him I owe. I doubt anyone in here would think that Jesus did anything He did out of obligation or duty because He felt like He needed to. Jesus never approached anything that He did out of a sense of, well, this is my job, this is my duty, this is what my Father wants me to do, so I guess I'll do it. Jesus paid it all out of love. Jesus paid it all sacrificially for us. So when we've been called to give, church, it's not out of duty. It's not out of obligation. It's a spirit of selflessness. It's a spirit of love. It's a spirit of sacrifice for a work and a cause that's much greater than me. It's much greater than what I can do on my own. That's what we're saying. When we worship God in this element, is we're giving back and we're saying, God, we trust You. We trust You that You will lead the people in charge of this, that Your cause will be acknowledged in this, that Your kingdom will grow out of this, and that I'm taking myself out of the way. I'm going to be selfless enough and love the church enough and even sacrifice enough that I have faith that this is going to be done and God's kingdom will benefit from it. It's an outward, and that's what Jesus was doing. Jesus didn't have to do anything. Jesus did what He did as an outward expression to show us how much He loved us, how much God loved us, and how much He wanted a relationship with us. And that's where we draw our inspiration. I made a statement earlier that I think this is the one element that's the most overlooked and passively reflected upon elements of worship. And there's need to discuss it as a matter of worship. Why? We talked about having faith, and the reason we lack faith a lot of times, because I think we lack faith in it. I really do honestly think sometimes we as Christian people lack faith in what's being done. We don't really maybe give it the prayer, the foresight, the forethought that it deserves. We're not really putting our faith in the elders that they deserve. We're not putting our faith in God that He deserves, that this is being done. And here's what's happened over many years in the church. The money's being used for God's glory, and we would say that. That's why we give, right? Many of our religious neighbors tithe. They give a certain percentage. Most of the time, it's around 10%. Most of our religious neighbors tithe 10%. We're not required to give a certain amount at all when it comes to the church here. We're not required to give a certain amount. But let me ask you this. It would require some of us to muster up a great deal of faith to tithe. And you'd be like, wait, what are you saying? What are you saying? Here's what I'm saying. Why do you ask that question? Why do you make that statement? I'm not saying we should tithe. I'm not saying we should be like the other religious bodies. V.P. Black once said this. V.P. Black, one of the greatest preachers in the brother, he said, the most disbelieved passage in the Bible for many in the church must be Acts 20:35. It is more blessed to give than to receive. Now, why would he say that? Why would he say that? Because of the major religious bodies in this world, of all the major religious bodies, denominations, if you will, in this world, the Church of Christ ranks dead last in giving. Dead last. Of every major religious body in this world, the Church of Christ, those who we say now, we're saying, we observe and follow everything that God has instructed us to do. Yet when it comes to faith and an element of worship such as giving, that's where we lack the most faith, is because we are dead last in the amount that we give to the church. The average church member gives 3% of their income. 3%. Church, that's sad. That's heartbreaking. The fact that 97% of our income we deem more necessary for other things than the church. 21% of the church give less than 2%. So close to a quarter, around a fifth of church members give less than 2% of their income, and the average give 3%. That's why I said a minute ago, it might cause some of us, many of us, to muster up a great deal of faith to tithe. You see, I said it's not about the amount that we give. God doesn't care about the amount that you give, but when we're withholding, when we withhold and when we deem other things more necessary for monetary gain and monetary benefit than the church, that's where we start to see a lack of faith. Do we really trust in the funds that are being spent? Do we really trust in the work that's being done with these funds for the blessing of God's kingdom, for the growing of the church? This isn't a competition. I'm not saying that. But it begs the question of our heart and our attitude toward worship. I'll say this. A lot of times we see this, and I'm not